Welcome back to Bookfulness. We're pushing forward with Futuyama and Kirkpatrick's evolution. Today, we're really shifting gears, scale-wise. Last time, it was all about the individual, how selection shapes life histories. But today, we're zooming out, way out. From the single organism to the group, diving deep into the evolution of social behavior.
Which is just fascinating because it forces us to grapple with the whole spectrum.
Exactly. Everything from extreme self-sacrifice, altruism, cooperation.
All the way to brutal selfishness, competition, and conflict. Even conflict inside families or even inside our own genomes. It gets wild.
It really does, and it brings up that core evolutionary puzzle, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Why cooperate? I mean, think about it. If being selfish, being a cheater, lets an individual get the benefits without the cost, that strategy should, mathematically speaking, just run rampant.
Right, it should just spread until any cooperative system just falls apart.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to figure out the evolutionary logic. What are the hidden benefits, the mechanisms like reciprocity or, crucially, relatedness that actually make cooperation stable and, well, predictable under certain conditions?
We're pulling all this from Chapter 12 today, Cooperation and Conflict, pages 295 to 310 in the 4th edition.
It's a really foundational chapter, loads of great examples.
And just a heads up, we'll be mentioning specific figures and boxes from the text figure 12.1, box 12a, things like that. As always, you can find all those visuals ready for you in the attached file or the description for this deep dive. Makes it much easier to follow along. Okay, let's get started. The book lays out a really clear framework first, right? Classifying social interactions based on fitness effects.
Yeah, it's a simple but powerful grid. You look at the actor, the one doing the behavior, and the recipient, the one affected by it, and you just ask, does their fitness go up or down?
So 4 possibilities.
4 possibilities. First, if both the actor and the recipient get a fitness boost, maybe more offspring, better survival, that's mutualism, a plus-plus situation. Think safety in numbers.
Okay, makes sense. Both win. What's next?
Then you've got selfishness, actor benefits, recipient is harmed, plus minus. Pretty straightforward evolutionarily, that one.
Right, that's kind of the default expectation in a way. And the other two?
Well, there's spite. That's minus minus. Both the actor and the recipient lose fitness.
That sounds counterintuitive. Why would that ever evolve?
It's rare, but it can happen theoretically if the harm to the recipient is much, much greater than the cost to the actor. And if they are negatively related or at least highly unrelated competitors, it's complex, not often seen.
Okay, so spite is the weird one. What's the last one? The big puzzle.
That's altruism, minus plus. The actor pays a fitness cost, takes a hit, but the recipient gains a fitness benefit.
And that's the core problem for simple evolutionary theory, isn't it? How does a gene for self-sacrifice spread?
Precisely. And when biologists talk broadly about cooperation, they usually mean behaviors that help another individual. So that term covers both mutualism, the plus-plus, and altruism, the plus-plus.
Gotcha.
But it's crucial to remember when we say selfish or altruistic here, we're not talking about intention or morality. Not at all.
Right. It's purely about the genetic outcome.
It's just tracking genetic advantage. A selfish gene is simply a piece of DNA that gets itself into the next generation more effectively than its alternative allele, period. Doesn't matter if it helps or harms the organism in the process.
And that brings us straight to what the book calls the cheater problem.
Cheater problem, yeah. If cooperation requires you to pay some cost, expend energy, take a risk, share food, then any mutation, any individual that figures out how to get the reward without paying that cost.
You have a huge advantage.
A massive advantage.
Yeah.
The cheater wins, their cheater gene spreads like wildfire, and eventually the whole cooperative system should collapse because everyone's trying to cheat.
So why doesn't it always collapse? Nature is full of cooperation.
Exactly. And the book gives this fantastic, almost bizarre example to illustrate the conflict. The slime mold, Dictyostelium discoideum. You probably remember this one from Intro Bio, figure 12.1.
Oh yeah, the social amoeba. They're individuals, but then they clump together.
Right. When food's abundant, they're just single cells doing their own thing, dividing. But when starvation hits, things change. Thousands of these independent cells get a signal, aggregate, and form this slug-like multicellular thing, a grex.
A slug made of amoebas.
Okay, this slug crawls around, finds a good spot, and does something amazing. It transforms into a fruiting body, like a tiny mushroom.
And this is where the sacrifice comes in.
This is it. About 20% of the cells, roughly, commit suicide. They differentiate into dead, rigid cells that form the stalk. This stalk lifts the other cells, the ones that become spores, up into the air.
So the stalk cells die, zero reproduction for them, but they help the spore cells get dispersed to potentially better places.
Total altruism. They give up everything.
Okay, so where's the cheater?
Ah, the cheater. Imagine a mutation arises in one cell. This mutation makes it less likely to become part of the stalk and more likely to end up in the spore cap.
That cell gets a huge fitness advantage within that slug. It reproduces, the others in the stalk don't.
Exactly. So that cheater mutation should spread every time aggregation happens. Logically, over time, you'd expect the population to become full of cheaters who can only form spores, meaning no stalk can form at all, the whole system crashes.
But it doesn't. Slime molds have been doing this for millions of years. So why haven't the cheaters completely taken over? What keeps the cooperation stable?
Well, part of the answer might be relatedness within the slug, which we'll get to. But first, let's look at simpler ways cooperation can evolve, ways that don't involve apparent sacrifice.
Like direct benefits.
Exactly. Cooperation via direct fitness benefits. This is just mutualism plus, where the act immediately helps the actor too. The book uses the example of European starlings flocking together when a predator, like a marsh harrier, attacks. That's figure 12.2.
Right, you see those huge swirling flocks. Looks incredibly coordinated, like teamwork.
It looks like it, but if you think about what each individual bird is doing, it's acting purely selfishly. Where's the safest place in a flock when a hawk attacks?
Ah, in the middle, surrounded by other birds.
Precisely. Every single bird tries to get to the center, maneuvering behind others. They're all looking out for number one.
But the result of everyone acting selfishly is that the whole group gets safer. Confusion effect, dilution effect.
Right. The net effect is mutual protection. But the selection pressure driving the behavior is individual benefit. No bird is intentionally sacrificing its safety for the group. It's maximizing its own immediate chances.
Okay, so that's one way. It just pays off directly. What about delayed benefits?
That's the next big category. Reciprocity, or sometimes called reciprocal altruism. Basically, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The key here is that interactions have to be repeated.
Because if you only meet once.
You might as well cheat and run. There's no consequence. Reciprocity needs the possibility of future interactions to work.
And the book has a great example here, too. The lance-tailed mannequins, figure 12.3. These birds in Central America.
Oh, the mannequins are fantastic. You get two males, an alpha and beta, performing this incredibly complex, synchronized courtship display together, leaping over each other, making specific calls. It's amazing to watch.
Looks like perfect teamwork to impress the female.
It does, but here's the catch. When the female finally makes her choice, the dominant alpha male gets virtually all the matings, like 99%. The subordinate beta male, who did half the work, he gets nothing. Zip.
So why on earth is he helping? That looks like pure altruism again. He's helping his rival succeed.
It looks like it, but the benefit is delayed. The beta male isn't getting immediate reproductive success, but he's gaining other things. Experience, maybe some social status.
Ah, so he's learning the dance. Or maybe waiting his turn.
Exactly. He's often queuing up. When the current alpha male eventually dies or gets kicked out, the experienced beta male is usually first in line to take over that prime territory and become the new alpha.
So the energy he spends helping now is an investment in his own future reproduction. The cost now is outweighed by the expected future benefit.
Precisely. It's a long-term strategy enabled by the social structure and repeated interactions.
This idea of cooperation versus cheating, especially with delayed payoffs, sounds like it fits perfectly with game theory.
It absolutely does. Box 12A in the chapter dives right into the prisoner's dilemma, which is sort of the classic model for this whole problem.
Right, the two prisoners who get arrested, and they have to decide whether to cooperate, stay silent, or defect, snitch on the other guy.
Exactly. The police set up the payoffs so that individually you're always better off defecting no matter what the other person does.
If the other guy stays silent, cooperates, you get the best deal by snitching, defecting. If the other guy snitches, defects, you still do better by snitching too to avoid the worst sentence.
So in a single encounter, a one-shot game, the rational choice, the evolutionarily stable strategy, ESS, is always to defect. Both players defect. And they both end up with a worse outcome than if they had both cooperated. It's suboptimal for the pair.
But that changes if the game is played repeatedly, right?
That's the key insight that Robert Axelrod and others explored. If you know you're going to interact with the same individual again and again, the shadow of the future changes everything.
Because your actions today affect how they treat you tomorrow.
Exactly. Cooperation can suddenly become the winning strategy. If you cooperate now, you encourage them to cooperate next time. If you defect, you invite retaliation. The potential future benefits of cooperation can outweigh the short-term gain from cheating. Strategies like tit for tat, cooperate first, then do whatever your partner did last time, often win out in repeated games.
It's amazing how this abstract game theory plays out in real biology, even down to microbes.
Oh yeah, the principles are universal. Look at Pseudomonas aeruginosa bacteria, figure 12.5. They need iron, which is often scarce. So they produce and secrete these molecules called cytophores.
What do they do?
They're like little iron scavengers. They go out, bind tightly to any available iron atoms, and then the bacteria reabsorb the cytophore iron complex. It's essential for growth.
But producing them costs the bacteria energy, right?
A significant amount of energy. And here's the problem. Once secreted, the cytophores float around. They become a public good. Any nearby bacterium can potentially grab one, whether they made it or not.
Ah, so cue the cheaters.
Cue the cheaters. Mutations arise where bacteria stop making their own cytophores, saving all that energy, but they keep the receptors to steal the ones produced by their cooperative neighbors.
So the cheaters get the iron without paying the cost. They should win, right? The system should collapse again.
It can collapse. The book makes it clear that the outcome depends heavily on the ecological context. If the bacteria in a local area are mostly unrelated and competition for iron is fierce, the cheaters do win. They replicate faster, steal all the cytophores, and the cooperative producers decline, potentially crashing the local population because eventually there's not enough iron for anyone.
But cooperation does persist. So when do the cooperators win?
Cooperators can hold their own or even drive out cheaters under specific conditions. High relatedness and weak local competition.
High relatedness, meaning the bacteria interacting are likely to be close genetic relatives, like clones.
Exactly. If the neighbors you're sharing cytophores with are basically your clones, then helping them helps copies of your own genes. And if competition isn't too intense, the overall benefit of having enough iron for the related group outweighs the cost of occasionally feeding a cheater. It's a dynamic balance, constantly susceptible to exploitation, but maintainable under the right conditions.
Okay, so reciprocity and direct benefits explain cooperation when there's some kind of eventual payoff for the actor. But that still leaves the really puzzling cases, the true altruism where the actor seems to genuinely lose out with no expectation of return.
And that brings us to arguably the single most important concept in understanding social evolution: kin selection.
This is W.D. Hamilton's big idea from the 1960s, right?
It is, and it fundamentally revolutionized how biologists thought about fitness and selection. Hamilton's insights solved the altruism paradox by expanding the definition of evolutionary success. It's not just about your own offspring.
It's about your genes getting cast on, regardless of whose offspring they end up in.
Pretty much. He distinguished between direct fitness, which is the standard measure your personal reproductive output, and indirect fitness.
Okay, what's indirect fitness?
Indirect fitness is the extra reproductive success of your relatives that comes about because of your actions, beyond what they would have achieved on their own. So if you help your siblings survive and reproduce more, you are indirectly propagating the genes you share with that sibling.
Ah, so inclusive fitness is the total package. Direct plus indirect.
Exactly. Inclusive fitness, your own offspring, plus your relative's extra offspring, weighted by how related you are to them. And kin selection is simply selection acting on this inclusive fitness. It's the evolutionary process that favors traits that increase the reproductive success of your relatives, even if it costs you personally.
So the gene for altruism can spread if the benefit it provides to relatives outweighs the cost to the individual carrying it?
Precisely. The gene essentially helps copies of itself that reside in other bodies.
And Hamilton didn't just have the idea, he gave us the math to predict when this should happen. Hamilton's rule.
The famous inequality, RBC. This is the bedrock of kin selection theory.
Okay, let's break that down carefully. R, B, and C, what do they stand for?
Okay, C is the cost to the actor. How much is their own direct fitness reduced by performing the altruistic act, measured ideally in number of offspring lost or foregone?
Right, and B?
B is the benefit to the recipient. How much is their direct fitness increased by the act, measured in the number of extra offspring they produce thanks to the help?
Cost to the actor, benefit to the recipient, and the crucial factor is R.
R is the coefficient of relatedness. It's a measure of genetic similarity between the actor and the recipient, specifically the probability that they share the same allele at a particular locus inherited from a common ancestor.
So for yourself, R1. For your identical twin, R11. For your child or your full sibling.
For parents, offspring, and full siblings, R 0.5. You share, on average, half your genes. For half-siblings, it's R 0.25. Grandparents, grandchildren, aunts, uncles to nieces, nephews, also R 0.25. First cousins, R 0.125, and so on. It drops off fast.
So Hamilton's rule, RBC, means altruism is favored by selection only when the benefit to the recipient, B, multiplied by how closely related they are, is greater than the cost to the actors.
Exactly. The closer the relative, the larger the R value, and the more likely it is the condition will be met, even for costly behaviors. You'd be selected to sacrifice a lot more for a sibling, R 0.5, than for a cousin, R 0.125.
This seems incredibly powerful theoretically. How well does it hold up when you try to measure these things in the real world?
That's always the challenge. Measuring B and C accurately in nature is really hard. But there are some classic studies where researchers have managed to quantify it, and the results are often remarkably consistent with the rule. The book highlights a great one: cooperative courtship in wild turkeys. That's box 12C.
Wild turkeys, how do they cooperate?
Well, male wild turkeys often form pairs, usually brothers or half-brothers, that display together to attract females. They strut and gobble as a team.
Okay.
But much like the mannequins, only one male in the pair, the dominant one, actually gets to mate. The subordinate male helps attract the female, helps defend the spot, but gets zero direct reproduction himself.
So he's paying a cost, C, by not trying to reproduce solo to give a benefit, B, to his dominant brother. That fits the altruism model perfectly.
It does, and researchers were able to estimate the values. They found that dominant males who had a subordinate helper produced, on average, 6.1 more offspring over their lifetimes compared to males who displayed alone. So B equals 6.1.
Okay, that's a big benefit. What about the cost to the subordinate? What did he give up?
By observing males who tried to display solo, they estimated that if the subordinate had gone off on his own, he likely would have produced, on average, about 0.9 offspring. So C, 0.9.
All right, B 6.1, C 0.9. Now we need RRA, the relatedness. Were they full brothers?
Genetic analysis showed that the cooperating males were indeed close relatives, with an average estimated R equals 0.42. A little less than the 0.5 for full siblings, which might mean some were half-sibs, or maybe there's some uncertainty in parentage in wild turkey flocks.
Okay, R 0.42. Let's plug it into Hamilton's rule. Is RB greater than C?
So we calculate the indirect fitness gain for the subordinate. R times B equals 0.42 multiplied by 6.1.
Which is, let's see, roughly 2.56.
Call it 2.6 offspring equivalents gained indirectly through his brother's success.
And the cost C was only zero 0.9 offspring foregone directly.
So is 2.6 greater than 0.9?
Yes, clearly. RBC is satisfied.
The altruistic behavior, helping your brother, even though you don't mate, spreads because the indirect genetic payoff outweighs the direct personal cost. The subordinate male's inclusive fitness is actually higher by helping than it would be by going solo. His net gain is roughly 2.6 minus 0.9, which is 1.7 offspring equivalents.
That's incredible. It turns seemingly self-sacrificial behavior into a genetically selfish strategy when viewed through the lens of inclusive fitness.
That's the power of kin selection. It resolves the paradox of altruism by showing how genes for helping relatives can increase their own frequency in the population.
Did applying Hamilton's rule clear up other long-standing mysteries in animal behavior, like, say, warning calls in prairie dogs or something?
Oh, absolutely. Think about alarm calls. An individual spots a predator and calls out. That call might attract the predator's attention to the caller, a cost C, but it warns nearby individuals, many of whom are likely relatives, providing a benefit, B. If those relatives are close enough kin, high R, the call evolves.
And what about helpers at the nest in birds, where young birds stick around and help their parents raise the next brood instead of breeding themselves?
Same logic applies. If the helpers are helping raise full siblings, RI 0.5, and if their own chances of successfully breeding solo right away are low, low C, while the benefit they provide to their parents' success is significant, high B, then helping can be favored by kin selection. It's a widespread phenomenon explained beautifully by this simple rule.
Okay, so kin selection provides this elegant mathematical explanation for cooperation and altruism, especially among relatives. But that same logic must also predict conflict, right? Because R is almost never equal to 1 except for clones or identical twins.
Exactly. As soon as the genetic interests of two individuals are not perfectly aligned, which is almost always the case, the stage is set for conflict. And Hamilton's rule implicitly defines the battleground. Conflict is the evolutionary default, not the exception.
Let's start with the most basic pairing. Conflict between mates. They need each other to reproduce, but they aren't related, and their long-term interests might diverge.
Right. This leads to what's called sexually antagonistic selection. This happens when a trait evolves that benefits one sex's reproductive success, but simultaneously harms the fitness of the other sex.
Like an evolutionary arms race between males and females.
Very much so. We talked about this a bit before with Drosophila fruit flies. Males evolve proteins in their seminal fluid accessory gland products that manipulate the female after mating.
How so?
These chemicals can do things like increase her egg-laying rate, make her less likely to remate with other males, sometimes even shorten her lifespan. All of these benefit the male's fitness by maximizing the number of offspring he sires.
But reducing the female's lifespan or controlling her remating obviously hurts her overall reproductive potential.
Precisely. So selection favors males who evolve more potent manipulative chemicals, while simultaneously favoring females who evolve resistance or countermeasures to those chemicals. It's a constant tug of war, pulling the traits away from what might be mutually optimal for the pair.
And this conflict extends beyond mating, right into raising the kids. Conflict over parental care. Figure 12.6 touches on this.
Yes. Who should invest the time and energy in caring for the offspring? Both parents benefit if the offspring survive, but each parent is selected to minimize their own cost relative to the partner's cost.
Because resources saved can be put towards future reproduction.
Exactly. Think about the optimal level of effort for, say, the father. That optimum level depends on how much effort the mother is already putting in. If she's doing a lot, his best strategy might be to slack off a bit and save energy.
And vice versa. If he slacks off, she might be forced to pick up the slack or the offspring suffer.
Right. Game theory models, using the evolutionarily stable strategy, ESS concept, predict an equilibrium point. It's the point where neither parent can improve their own fitness by unilaterally changing their level of effort, given what the other parent is doing. It's often a compromise, but one reached through underlying conflict, not necessarily harmonious agreement. There can be strategies of manipulation, coercion, or even desertion involved.
Okay, conflict between mates is one thing, but conflict within the family can get much darker. The book discusses things like infanticide and siblicide.
Yeah, these are the really stark examples that force us to see how ruthless natural selection can be when genetic interests diverge, even among apparent family members. When Hamilton and others first explored these ideas, the suggestion that killing babies or siblings could be adaptive was pretty shocking.
Let's take infanticide. The classic example is male lions taking over a pride, right? Figure 12.8.
Right. When a new coalition of males ousts the resident males, one of the first things they often do is systematically kill any young cubs in the pride that were sired by the previous males.
Why? What's the evolutionary logic there?
It's twofold and brutally efficient from the new male's perspective. First, those cubs are genetic competitors. Removing them clears the way for his own future offspring. Second, and more immediately, lactation suppresses ovulation in female lions. By killing the dependent cubs, the females stop lactating and come back into estrus much sooner.
So the new males can mate with the females and start siring their own offspring faster. It maximizes their reproductive window.
Exactly. It's a direct, albeit gruesome way to boost their own direct fitness at the expense of the previous male's genes and the killed offspring.
And it's not just males, right? The book mentions female infanticide too.
Yes, though often for different reasons. In rodents like mice, or even some primates, females might kill some of their own young or the young of other females, particularly when resources are scarce. If a mother can't realistically raise a whole large litter, selective infanticide might increase the survival chances of the remaining offspring or increase her own chances of future reproduction.
Grim stuff. And then there's siblicide. Sibling rivalry taken to the extreme. Figure 12.9.
Offspring killing their own siblings. It's surprisingly common, especially in birds like eagles, pelicans, herons, booby species, where parents often lay one or two eggs, but might struggle to feed both chicks if food is scarce.
The spare egg, sometimes called the Cain and Abel situation.
Right. Often, the first chick to hatch is larger and stronger. If resources become limited, that older chick will relentlessly harass, outcompete for food, and sometimes directly attack and kill its younger sibling.
And the parents just let it happen.
Often, yes. From the parent's perspective, while losing an offspring is bad, it might be better than trying to divide limited food equally between two chicks, resulting in both starving or being severely weakened. Raising one strong, healthy offspring might be the strategy that maximizes the parent's total lifetime reproductive success. The conflict is driven by the selfish interests of the offspring, R1 with self, only R0.5 with sibling. But the parent's acquiescence is also shaped by their own fitness calculations.
This leads us to the most fundamental conflict of all, maybe parent-offspring conflict. It seems like parents and children should have aligned interests, but the genetics say otherwise.
The conflict is baked right into the relatedness coefficients. An offspring is related to itself by RE1, perfect relatedness, but it's related to its full sibling by only RE 0.5.
So from the offspring's point of view, any resource it gets is worth twice as much genetically as the same resource going to its sibling.
Exactly. Therefore, the offspring is selected to demand more parental investment, more food, more care, for a longer time than the parent is selected to provide.
Why does the parent want to provide less?
Because the parent is equally related, RE 0.5, to all of its offspring present and potential future ones. The parent is selected to maximize its total lifetime reproduction. Providing excessive resources to one current offspring might compromise the parent's ability to survive and produce more offspring later.
So there's a fundamental disagreement over the optimal level of investment. The offspring wants more, up to the point where the cost to its sibling's fitness, weighted by RO 0.5, equals the benefit to its own fitness. The parent wants to stop investing sooner when the cost to its future reproduction equals the benefit to the current offspring.
Right. This creates inherent conflict over things like weaning time, how much food is delivered, how long protection lasts. It's a constant negotiation, often involving begging behaviors from the offspring and withdrawal from the parent.
And the book gives this absolutely stunning physiological example of this conflict happening silently, deep within the human body during pregnancy, in the womb.
Yeah, the placenta is an amazing evolutionary battleground. It's not just a passive nutrient exchange system. It's an arena for parent-offspring conflict.
How so?
Well, remember, the parent wants to control resource flow, maybe diverting resources if needed for her own survival or future offspring. The fetus, however, wants to maximize resource extraction now. So fetal cells, specifically trophoblast cells originating from the embryo, actually invade the mother's uterine lining.
Invade, like aggressively.
Aggressively. They migrate into the spiral arteries, the small arteries in the uterus that supply blood to the placenta. And once they're in the artery walls, they start remodeling them.
Remodeling how?
They destroy the smooth muscle tissue and even the nerve endings within those arterial walls.
Why would they do that?
By destroying the muscle, the fetus effectively prevents the mother from being able to constrict those arteries and reduce blood flow to the placenta. It ensures a constant high-pressure flow of maternal blood, maximizing nutrient and oxygen delivery to the fetus, potentially even to the mother's detriment if her resources are limited.
Wow. The fetus is literally hijacking the mother's circulatory control system to force more resources out of her.
It's a powerful illustration that parent-offspring conflict isn't just about behavioral squabbles. It's deeply embedded in our physiology, driven by those fundamental differences in genetic interest.
Okay, we've seen how differences in relatedness fuel conflict, but let's swing back to the other extreme. The most intense cooperation found in nature, eusociality.
Right, the ultimate families. Eusociality is a specific, highly advanced form of social organization. Think ants, bees, wasps, termites. It's defined by three key characteristics, as shown in figure 12.10.
What are they?
First, you have overlapping generations. Adults, their parents, maybe even grandparents, all live together in the same colony. Second, there's cooperative brood care, meaning individuals care for offspring that are not their own.
And the third one is the most striking, isn't it?
It is the presence of specialized castes, including individuals who are largely or completely non-reproductive, the sterile workers or soldiers who dedicate their lives to supporting the reproduction of others, typically a single queen or a few reproductives.
A whole caste of individuals giving up their own reproduction entirely. That seems like the absolute pinnacle of altruism. How could a gene for sterility possibly evolve through natural selection?
It seems completely counterintuitive under standard individual selection. And this is where Hamilton's work on kin selection provided the crucial breakthrough, especially with his haplodiploidy hypothesis.
This applies mainly to the Hymenoptera ants, bees, and wasps because they have that weird genetics system, right?
Exactly. Haplodiploidy. It means sex is determined by the number of chromosome sets. Females develop from fertilized eggs, so they are diploid, 2 sets of chromosomes, one from mom, one from dad, just like us.
But the males?
Males develop from unfertilized eggs. They are haploid, only 1 set of chromosomes from the mother. They have no father.
Okay, weird. How does that affect relatedness in a way that promotes eusociality?
It creates a crucial asymmetry in relatedness, particularly between sisters. Let's think about a female worker bee. If she were to leave the hive and have her own offspring, daughters. Her relatedness to them would be the standard R equal zero point 0.5. She passes on half her genes.
Right. Standard diploid inheritance.
Now consider her relatedness to her full sisters in the hive, assuming one queen mated with one haploid male. She gets half her genes from her diploid mother. So the chance of sharing any given maternal allele with a sister is 0.5, 0.54, it's zero point 0.2, same as usual.
Okay, 0.25 from the mother's side. What about the father?
The father is haploid. He only has one set of chromosomes.
Is-
This means he produces sperm that are all genetically identical to each other, and he passes this identical set to all his daughters.
So all the sisters get the exact same set of genes from their father.
Exactly. For the paternal half of their genome, full sisters are essentially identical twins. The probability of sharing any given paternal allele is 1.0. Since half their genes come from the father, the paternal contribution to their relatedness is 0.5, 1.0 equals 0.5.
Okay, let's add that up. 0.25 relatedness from the mother's side plus 0.5 relatedness from the father's side.
Equals R 0.75.
Wow. So a female worker is more closely related to her full sisters, R equals 0.75, than she would be to her own daughters.
And that is the core of the haplodiploidy hypothesis, because RBC, this super high relatedness between sisters, RE 0.75, provides a massive genetic incentive for a female to forego her own reproduction, low C perhaps, if founding a new nest is hard, and instead invest her energy in helping her mother, the queen, produce more sisters, high B, weighted by the super high R 0.75.
The indirect fitness payoff from raising sisters is potentially much higher than the direct fitness payoff from raising daughters. It genetically predisposes Hymenoptera towards evolving sterile female worker castes.
It's considered a major factor, yes. It's not the only factor. Ecological conditions like the need for fortress defense or complex brood care also play roles. And importantly, not all eusocial animals are haplodiploid. Termites, for example, are fully diploid.
So haplodiploidy helps, but doesn't fully explain everything.
Correct. High relatedness, perhaps achieved through intense inbreeding in the termite case, seems to be a common theme, but the specific mechanisms vary.
Okay, so eusocial colonies are these amazing pinnacles of cooperation driven by high relatedness. But given everything we've said about conflict arising when R isn't 1, surely there's still conflict within these supposedly harmonious colonies.
Oh, absolutely. The potential for conflict never truly disappears. Even with high relatedness, individual interests don't perfectly align. A major source of conflict in eusocial insect colonies revolves around male production.
Why males specifically?
Remember, males are haploid, developing from unfertilized eggs. The queen can lay unfertilized eggs to produce sons, related to her by R.5. But sometimes workers can also lay unfertilized eggs.
Can workers mate?
Usually not, but they don't need to mate to produce sons. They can just lay haploid eggs. Now think about relatedness again from a worker's perspective. How related is she to her own son?
She gives him half her genes, but he's haploid. It's still RE.5, right? Like a mother to any offspring.
Correct. A worker is related to her own son by RE.5. But how related is she to the queen's son, her brother?
Okay, they share the same mother, diploid, so 0.5 equals 0.25 from the mother. The brother has no father.
Ooh.
So is that it? R.25.
That's it. A worker is related to her brother, the queen's son, by only R equal 0.25.
Ah, so a worker's is genetically better off if she produces a son, R equal 0.5, than if the queen produces a son, R equal 0.25 from the worker's perspective.
Exactly. Selection should favor workers who try to sneak in their own male eggs. This sets up a direct conflict between the queen and the workers over who gets to produce the males of the colony.
So how is this conflict managed? Do the workers just lay eggs everywhere?
No, because there are policing mechanisms. This leads to worker policing. In many species, the queen can detect and destroy eggs laid by workers. More surprisingly, in some species like honeybees, workers actively police each other.
Workers kill the eggs laid by other workers. Why would they do that?
Think about relatedness again. A worker is related to her sister's son, her nephew, by R equals 0.375. It's complicated. Average of 0.25 maternal plus 0.5 paternal if they share the same father, but often lower if the queen mated multiple times. Crucially, she's often less related to her nephew than she is to her brother, the queen's son, R equals 0.25. If the queen mated multiply, relatedness to nephews can drop below 0.25.
So it's in a worker's genetic interest to prevent her sisters from reproducing and let the queen produce the males instead. Or even kill nephews to favor brothers.
Under certain conditions related to queen mating frequency, yes. It's another stunning example where kin selection drives both extreme cooperation, working for the colony, and extreme conflict, killing nephews or worker-laid eggs simultaneously. It all comes down to maximizing the transmission of shared genes, however that's achieved.
We've gone from individuals to groups to families to eusocial colonies. Now we need to go even deeper, right down to the level of the genes themselves. Conflict doesn't stop at the organism boundary.
Not at all. The genome itself can be a battleground, with individual genetic elements acting selfishly, promoting their own transmission, even if it harms the organism carrying them. We're talking about selection acting below the level of the individual.
The book calls this segregation distortion or meiotic drive. What does that mean?
Okay, normally, meiosis, the process of making sperm or eggs, is supposed to be fair. Mendel's laws dictate that if an individual is heterozygous, has two different alleles, say A and A, each allele should have a 50% chance of ending up in any given gamete. It's a fair coin toss.
Right. 50-50 transmissions.
Segregation distortion, or meiotic drive, occurs when a selfish allele evolves a mechanism to cheat that 50% rule. It biases the process so that it gets transmitted to more than half, sometimes nearly 100%, of the functional gametes.
How on earth can a gene do that?
There are various sneaky mechanisms. A common one involves the selfish allele producing some kind of toxin or disabling factor that specifically targets the gametes carrying the other allele.
So it kills its competition.
Essentially, yes. The book is the example of the stock-eyed flies, Certidiopsis, figure 12.11. There's a driving allele on the X chromosome. In males carrying this driver, sperm that carry the Y chromosome, which doesn't have the driver, are often defective or killed off during development in the testes.
So the male produces mostly X-bearing sperm carrying the driver.
Exactly. The driver ensures its own preferential transmission, often well above 50%. The downside is that this can severely reduce the male's overall fertility, harming the individual, but the gene itself still spreads because its transmission rate is so high.
And this happens in female meiosis, too, with eggs.
Yes, similar mechanisms exist. In some plants, like monkey flowers, there's competition among chromosomes during female meiosis. Only one of the 4 meiotic products becomes the actual ovule nucleus. The other 3 become polar bodies and die. Selfish centromere DNA sequences have evolved that are better at maneuvering themselves into the ovule position, ensuring their survival while their rivals get discarded.
It's like a microscopic Hunger Games just to get into the next generation.
It really is. And this natural phenomenon of gene drive is so powerful that scientists are now trying to harness it for practical purposes.
Like the mosquito example.
Right. Creating genetically modified mosquitoes, where a gene for, say, malaria resistance is linked to a drive system. The idea is that this resistance gene would spread through the wild mosquito population much faster than normal inheritance, potentially reducing disease transmission. It's based directly on these naturally occurring selfish genetic elements.
But it also shows how potent these selfish elements can be, maybe even dangerously so.
Absolutely. Which brings us to another major category of selfish genes, transposable elements, TES, or jumping genes, sometimes called selfish DNA. Figure 12.12 shows a schematic.
These aren't cheating meiosis, they're just copying themselves within the genome.
Exactly. TS are essentially molecular parasites living within our DNA. They contain genes that code for enzymes, allowing them to cut or copy themselves and insert the new copy somewhere else in the genome.
Why do they do this?
Simply because TEs that are better at copying themselves leave more copies in the next generation. Selection acts directly on the TE's ability to replicate, largely independent of whether this replication helps or harms the host organism.
And the scale of this is huge, right? The book says nearly half our genome.
It's staggering. Estimates vary, but something like 45–50% of the human genome consists of sequences derived from transposable elements. They are a massive component of our genetic material.
What's the most common one?
The book mentions the ALU element. It's a short sequence, only about 300 base pairs, but there are over 1 million copies scattered throughout our genome. That single element accounts for more than 10% of all our DNA.
1 million copies of a parasite, how do they spread?
ALU elements are retrotransposons. They get transcribed into RNA, then an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, often borrowed from other TEs, makes a DNA copy from that RNA, and that DNA copy gets inserted back into the genome at a new location. Lather, rinse, repeat over evolutionary time.
If half our genome is just self-replicating junk, or worse, potentially harmful parasites, how do we even function? Doesn't this cause problems?
It definitely can cause problems.
Yeah.
If a TE inserts itself into the middle of an important gene, It can disrupt its function, causing genetic diseases.
Mm.
Our genomes have evolved complex defense mechanisms to fight back things like DNA methylation that silences TEs and RNA interference pathways like pyranase in the germline that target and destroy TE transcripts.
So it's a constant arms race between the TEs trying to spread and the host genome trying to shut them down.
A relentless arms race, exactly. It's shaped the evolution of genome structure and regulation enormously.
And sometimes these selfish elements can have really dramatic effects on the host population, like that PSR chromosome in wasps.
The PSR paternal sex ratio chromosome in the wasp Nasonia vitripennis. That's a wild one. It's a tiny extra chromosome, a B chromosome, that's only transmitted through sperm.
Okay, what does it do?
When a sperm-carrying PSR fertilizes an egg, which would normally develop into a diploid female, the PSR somehow causes all the other chromosomes inherited from the father to be destroyed early in development.
So the paternal contribution, except for PSR, is lost.
Yes, and because Nasonia sex is determined by ploidy, diploid female, haploid male, losing the paternal set converts the embryo into a haploid male.
So the PSR element turns females into males. Why?
Because PSR is only transmitted through sperm. By converting potential daughters into sons, it ensures its own transmission to the next generation via the sperm those sons will produce. It's maximizing its own propagation pathway.
But what does that do to the wasp population?
It can drastically skew the sex ratio towards males. If PSR spreads too widely, there might not be enough females left for the males to mate with, potentially driving the entire population towards extinction. It's a stark example of how selection on a selfish genetic element can override the interests of the individual organism and even the species.
Okay, one more level of internal conflict. The battle between different genomes within the same cell. Specifically, nuclear genes versus organelle genes, like mitochondria.
Right. This conflict arises because mitochondria and chloroplasts in plants have their own small genomes, and crucially, they are typically inherited uniparentally, almost always maternally, through the egg cytoplasm, not through the sperm.
So any mitochondrial mutation that harms males
Is essentially invisible to selection, acting on the mitochondrial lineage itself, because males don't transmit mitochondria to their offspring. This mother's curse means male-harming mitochondrial mutations can accumulate in a population.
And this can lead to direct conflict with nuclear genes.
Yes, particularly over sex determination or allocation. The book uses the great example of cytoplasmic male sterility, CMS, in plants like thyme, figure 12.13.
CMS, what is that?
It's caused by a mutation, CMS plus, that arises in the mitochondrial genome. This mutation prevents the plant from producing viable pollen, making it functionally male sterile.
Why would a mutation for sterility spread?
Because the mitochondria only care about being passed on through ovules, eggs. Since the CMS plus 1 mutation is in the mitochondria, it's only transmitted via ovules anyway. Pollen production is irrelevant to its transmission. In fact, by stopping pollen production, the plant often reallocates those saved resources into making more ovules.
Ah, so the CMS plus mitochondrion actually increases its own transmission by making more eggs, even though it sterilizes the male function of the plant.
Exactly. It spreads rapidly because it favors the maternal transmission pathway.
But the nuclear genes have different interests, right? They are inherited from both parents, pollen and ovule, and are generally selected to maintain a balanced sex ratio or function, like producing both pollen and ovules in hermaphrodites.
Right. So when CMS spreads due to the selfish mitochondrion, this creates strong selection pressure on the nuclear genome to counteract it. A nuclear restore allele, 1+ deal, can evolve that suppresses the CMS plus effect and restores male fertility.
So you get an arms race again. The mitochondria evolve male sterility, the nucleus evolves restores, maybe the mitochondria evolve ways around the restores.
Precisely. It's a classic intergenomic conflict driven by the different transmission routes and resulting fitness interests of the mitochondrial versus the nuclear genomes.
We've seen selfishness at the gene level, the individual level, conflict within families. It seems like selfishness usually wins. This brings us back to an older, sometimes controversial idea: group selection. Can selection act on whole groups?
Yeah, group selection has had a rocky history in evolutionary biology.
Yeah.
The basic idea is simple. If groups with more cooperative individuals are more productive or less likely to go extinct than groups with more selfish individuals, then cooperation could evolve through selection between groups.
Makes intuitive sense. Cooperative groups should beat selfish groups, so why was it controversial?
The main problem, identified early on by people like George C. Williams, is that selection within groups usually acts much faster and stronger than selection between groups. Even if a group benefits from cooperation, any selfish cheater individual that arises within that group has a massive advantage and will likely spread rapidly, undermining the cooperation before the slow process of group-level selection can favor the cooperative group.
So individual selection usually trumps group selection.
In its simplest form, yes, that's often the case. However, the concept hasn't entirely gone away, and the book highlights where it is considered important, especially when reframed or linked to other concepts. A key area is the evolution of pathogen virulence. Look at figure 12.15.
How does group selection apply to how sick a pathogen makes its host?
Think of a host organism like you as containing a group of infecting pathogens, bacteria, or viruses. Within that group, inside your body, individual selection favors pathogen strains that replicate the fastest. Faster replication usually means higher virulence, making the host sicker.
Okay, fastest replicator wins the race inside the host.
But there's a catch. If the pathogens replicate too fast and become too virulent, they might kill the host very quickly.
Which is bad for the pathogens in that host, because a dead host stops transmitting them.
Exactly. So group selection, or selection acting between different infected hosts, can favor lower virulence. Pathogen groups, infections that are less virulent, allow their hosts to live longer and walk around, increasing the total opportunities for the pathogens to transmit to new hosts.
So it's a trade-off between replicating fast within the host and ensuring transmission between hosts.
It's a classic trade-off, shaped by these two levels of selection. The optimal level of virulence that evolves depends critically on the mode of transmission.
Oh, so.
If transmission between hosts is very easy and frequent, think of the flu spreading through coughs and sneezes, horizontal transmission, then individual selection within the host dominates. The fastest replicators win because they can jump to a new host easily before the current one dies. This favors high virulence.
But if transmission is difficult or depends on the host staying alive for a long time, or if it's mainly vertical transmission, parent to offspring,
then group selection, favoring host longevity, becomes more powerful. Pathogens that rely on their host surviving for transmission, or those passed down genetically, tend to evolve lower virulence because the fate of the pathogen group is tightly linked to the fate of the host individual.
Okay, so virulence is one clear case. How does this relate back to kin selection? Is group selection just kin selection in disguise sometimes?
Often, yes. Many biological groups that seem to function cooperatively, like animal families, or even the cells within a multicellular organism, are actually composed of close relatives. So what looks like group selection might actually be driven by the high average relatedness within the group, making it essentially kin selection acting on an extended family.
This leads into the final big idea: major evolutionary transitions. These huge leaps in complexity, like the origin of cells, or multicellular life, or eusocial colonies.
Right. These are transitions where entities that were previously capable of independent replication, like single cells, somehow aggregate and combine to form a new, higher-level individual, like a multicellular organism, where the lower-level units often lose their ability to reproduce independently.
How could such a transition happen? Why would individual cells give up their autonomy to become part of a larger whole?
Kin selection is absolutely crucial here. Think about the origin of multicellularity. How do complex animals and plants develop? They almost always start from a single cell, a fertilized egg, or a zygote.
Which means all the trillions of cells in the resulting organism are
Genetically identical, or virtually identical, barring somatic mutations. They are clones. The relatedness are between any two cells in your body is essentially one.
So kin selection strongly favors cooperation among cells. They are all carrying the same genes, so helping any other cell survive and function helps propagate those genes.
Exactly. This high relatedness is what allows for the extreme division of labor and specialization we see in multicellular organisms. Liver cells do their job, nerve cells do theirs, because they all share the same underlying genetic interest in the survival and reproduction of the whole organism.
But even here, conflict can arise, right? You mentioned cancer earlier.
Cancer is the ultimate breakdown of this multicellular cooperation. It's essentially a rebellion at the cellular level. A mutation arises in a single cell that causes it to ignore the normal controls on cell division and replication. It starts proliferating selfishly.
So selection within the organism favors that cancerous cell line because it replicates faster than its neighbors.
Yes, it's cheating the cooperative system.
But selection at the level of the whole organism strongly disfavors cancer because it disrupts function and threatens survival.
Precisely. So The evolution of multicellularity wasn't just about cooperation. It was also about evolving sophisticated policing mechanisms to suppress this kind of internal cheating. Things like programmed cell death, apoptosis, immune surveillance, limits on the number of times cells can divide, telomeres.
These are like group-level adaptations to maintain the integrity of the higher-level individual against selfish lower-level units.
That's a great way to put it. The emergence and stability of these major transitions, creating new levels of individuality, depend critically on mechanisms that align the fitness interests of the lower level components, often through high relatedness, and actively police or suppress conflicts that inevitably arise. Segregating the germline, the reproductive cells, early in development is another key policing strategy, preventing selfish somatic mutations from being passed on to the next generation. Hashtag outro. So wrapping this all up, what we've really traced today is the fundamental evolutionary logic of social life. Cooperation, especially that really puzzling altruism, often turns out to be driven either by delayed benefits like reciprocity, or more often by the powerful force of shared genes kin selection. It's usually not about sacrificing for the good of the species, but about maximizing the propagation of one's own gene, directly or indirectly.
And conversely, conflict seems to be the baseline expectation whenever genetic interests don't perfectly align, which is almost always. We saw it between mates, between parents and offspring, siblings, even within eusocial colonies, and right down to the genes warring within our own cells.
It's a constant dynamic tension. Hamilton's rule, RBC, isn't just about altruism. It also tells you exactly when conflict is expected, whenever RB is less than C, from an individual's perspective. These rules help explain so much, from family dynamics to microbial interactions, even aspects of disease like cancer, which is really just runaway cellular selfishness disrupting the cooperative multicellular group.
And these systems aren't static, are they? They're constantly evolving, with cooperation always vulnerable to cheaters and conflict always being managed or suppressed by new adaptations.
Always a dynamic balance.
Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with, building on that internal conflict idea. We learned today that something like half of your human genome is basically parasitic DNA transposable elements just focused on copying themselves.
Yeah, the selfish DNA. It's a sobering thought.
If that much of our own genetic code is driven by its own relentless replication, often regardless of our well-being, how much of who we think we are, our behaviors, our preferences, maybe even our cognitive traits, might actually be complex side effects or byproducts of these invisible ancient genetic conflicts playing out inside us, rather than traits purely selected for our benefit as individuals.
That is quite the thought. How much are we just vessels for these deeper evolutionary games? Very unsettling perspective indeed.
Something to ponder.
All right.
All right, we've spent this deep dive focused inside the species boundary. Next time, we're looking outwards. We'll be exploring interactions among species.
Ah, coevolution. Predators and prey, parasites and hosts, and those amazing complex partnerships of mutualism, the evolutionary arms races between different forms of life.
Exactly. Should be fascinating. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into bookfulness. We hope you'll join us for the next one.